Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Gritty Hour. Today's podcast is going to deal with I'd like it to deal with the level of education in the United States, specifically since the inception of the Department of Education in 1977. I have two illustrious guests with me today. I have John Hogan, who's been a teacher for 25 years, and JR McCarthy, who's been a teacher for 38 years. So we have a lot of experience on the table. And welcome to the Gritty Hour, gentlemen.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
It's a pleasure to have you both here. We may stop. We're supposed to have a third guest. He may or may not show up, so we may stop in betwixt. So basically, that's where I was coming from. But I'll let you gentlemen take it from. What do you think about that particular aspect, Mr. McCarthy?
You know, when you approached me about this conversation, I was very eager to have it, and I still am, because I can't see how anybody could deny that the quality of education has diminished considerably since 1977. And you could make a case for saying that the quality of education has diminished since 1868, which was the very first time that the federal government created a bureaucracy for any kind of federal involvement in education, which was obviously a state's matter, and never perceived as anything but a state's matter up until then. I wanted to do a little research only because I wanted to temper my own judgment, because teachers are not self-employed, but teachers can be, and maybe John would back me up on this, teachers can be a little isolated. We work with our colleagues in a very elementary way. We spend most of our time with the kids.
I would agree. Yeah, sorry. I would agree with that.
Yeah, and we are constantly dealing with mandates, both benign and ridiculous, from powers, with more authority than ourselves, and there is, among other things, a tendency to think that we're constantly being asked to do more, but not more as opposed to, not other than what we were originally hired to do, what we were originally licensed to do and prepared ourselves educationally to do, but in addition to what we're doing. I don't want to get too far afield with this, but I have some thoughts on how we obviously see a decline in the rate of education, and yet we're doubling down all the time on the investment. And that's kind of mysterious. So it's a conversation worth having, and I think I'm, gonna let Mr. Hogan talk a little bit.
I was going to ask Mr. Hogan, do you feel the same way? Is your experience similar to Mr. McCarthy's?
My screen freezed a little bit, but to definitely piggyback off his last statement of doing more, definitely from when I started in the late 1990s to now, it's definitely, there's a lot more pressure, and they're asking us to do more with less, which is even more difficult in many ways. And our children have changed in so many ways with these last couple past decades, and the ways in which I feel, we need more days, and we get one day, 1 or 2 workshop days an entire school year, where we can kind of collaborate with our colleagues. And recently, I could say probably within the last 7 years, I've not, my organization would bring in a speaker, or somebody that just to, you need to stay current. And we are a very insular type of uh, workplace, because we are dealing with children all day long. That's, and we do not get to work collaboratively as much as I would like to, but it is why I got into the business, and it's okay. But it would always, the ratio, I don't know how they do it in other countries, but if you have a better ratio from teacher to student, it doesn't matter. I wouldn't care if there was 3 or 4 other phys ed teachers in my classroom, because the ratio is better, and that makes the kids feel more safe. And that is something that is a dream, but we just, as educators, just do the best we can, and we move forward, and we give the best to our kids. Definitely the workload in reference to the amount of paperwork now that we have to do has increased, and just it is taxing us sometimes. And as education in America, it is, it's just as it's a circular type of a deal. We find one idea and we think it's the greatest, and then we go to another idea. And what I find, it's reciprocal, where we just end up back at the same place we started, and they want to try that again. Well, it didn't work that time, over 15 years ago. Why were we trying it again? That's my starting point.
Another person who is also a teacher told me the other day that since 1977, there is an entire level of administration in the education system that didn't exist, at least when I went to high school or grammar school. As I remember, it would be a principal, and that was the be all and say all of what happened in the school, and there were no administrators. There seems to be, since then, an entire level of administrators out there, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, or is the system too big for one person to deal with within a school?
To
You know,
say the very least, I think that observation is spot on. I sympathize with a lot of what John says, but in many ways, my experience has been quite different. I feel sometimes like I'm bombarded with professional development and new ideas and opportunities to talk to people about different methodologies and different philosophies. And sometimes there's a glut of these things. And when there is any kind of top heaviness with administration, there is also an expectation that these things will be implemented. And, it gets to the point where there, at the risk of sounding completely cliche, there are too many cooks spoiling the stew. I because of the way you frame this conversation, as I said, I look back over the career of the history of federal involvement in education in this country, and it's notable that what has always motivated the federal government to get involved in education is usually highly commendable, and usually in response to genuine injustice. Andrew Johnson was president in 1868 when the federal government first started collecting data about effective methods of education for the purpose of leveling the playing field for for Black kids mostly, but for all marginalized populations during the Reconstruction period. There is a surge of interest in the 50s in developing better methods of science and math instruction in response to Sputnik and in response to the Cold War. And then a couple of years later, Lyndon Johnson institutes the War on Poverty, and education is identified, rightly so, as the silver bullet, the real element that was going to make a difference in the lives of one generation of marginalized people to the next. And now, you know, in our contemporary society, in the world we're at right now, it's the whole matter of the not so much federal involvement, but national reaction to policies like Florida's Parental Rights and Education Bill. You recognize that somebody is trying to make education more inclusive, which is highly commendable. You recognize that education has been seen for many generations as a tool for social change. But what you learn both as a teacher and as a human being in your life is that, you know, intentions, no matter how good or pure they may be, do not really mitigate bad outcomes or effects or you know, a lack of evidence that what's being applied is effective. So, you know, I realize, again, I'm going all over the place here, but you go back, Tommy, to the point that you made about administrators being more numerous. Okay, when I was teaching in Catholic school, one of the selling points that we brought to the table, other than traditional Christian values and original safe environment, was the idea that less than 7% of the personnel in a parochial school in New York City were administrators, at a time when in New York City, 33% of the personnel of the school system were administrators. If you implement new policies, people have to oversee them. I'm not accusing these people of bilking the system or creating you know, work for themselves, but I'm just saying that with all of that glut of new information and new procedure, you know, new methodology, what gets lost is the basics. And wow, I am talking way too much.
Well, no,
But,
that was
you
the point I wanted to bring up. You had mentioned Reconstruction and the Great Society and the 100 years in between. From my point of view, which is a pedestrian point of view in the teaching world, that's a distribution problem. Not, you know, that's not so much a quality of education or a type of education. It just seems like, from my perception, the tried and true has been pushed to the wayside in favor of, I don't know, the trend of the day, if you want. I don't know if you agree with that, John, or not.
Well, I mean, there's always been different types of, you know, the Montessori concept. There's been always, we've always had, I don't know the exactly, as the right of a parent to homeschool. That's since COVID. Now that's really exploded too. And even before COVID, there's many states that are, you know, giving parents rights to homeschool their children if they meet the state's standards. And that's the other problem here too. The big elephant in the room is each state. We have there's national standards and state standards, you know, and within those states, their populations are who they are, and they are allowed to make laws or accept the people that are in charge of their, you know, we don't, I feel, as we've grown as a nation, the more complex we have gotten with our social structure in the nuclear family. We all know where that's gone, unfortunately. Both parents mostly in our country have to work full-time jobs to support the family, and therefore the lack of, you know, the interest. The parents are worried so much about themselves and working, and to stay on top of each child. Each child, I believe, wants to know that they're valued of course at school, but at home as well, and being held accountable. and then you have that extreme, and then in some places in our country, as we well know, with the fluency, you have the opposite. You have the helicopter parent who wants to know every single thing that's going on with their child and why they got a B plus and not an A, and it's just changed how every decade's changed in America, and how it's just made education even more anxious and more challenging for everyone that's involved in the process.
So you think education is reactive rather than just going with the tried and true to the next generation, to the next?
You know, when you talk about, I'm sorry, go ahead, John.
Go ahead, JR. Go ahead, JR.
When you talk about the tried and true, Tom, you know, I think there is tremendous merit to the idea that what has happened is that all right. I'm trying to collect my thoughts. It isn't so much, in my experience, that we have gone away from the tried and true. There was compelling evidence at the high school level, in my own experience, that the tried and true wasn't working. And I don't want to point fingers or anything like that, but I went into special education because I could see that the tried and true wasn't working. But I had to deal with the fact that it wasn't working, and I had to find something that would work, as opposed to pointing out that the reason the tried and true in the high school curriculum wasn't working was because the grammar school, the kids were not arriving at high school with the skills that were the prerequisites of success in the high school curriculum, whether it was in English or social studies or math or science, or even in the arts and in physical education. You know, when you talked to me about being with you this evening, one of the things that you mentioned was that, one of the things that is obviously decreased in this, one of the things that has observably decreased is any kind of sense of civics, any kind of sense of the responsibility of a citizen in the government. Obviously these things have to be taught. So when kids come to high school without the basics, it isn't so much a matter of the tried and true is no longer working, in the sense that it's not effective anymore. The tried and true isn't working because they're not bringing to the table what they need to bring to the table in order for the tried and true to work.
When you say they, who are you talking about?
What?
When you say they, who are you referring to?
I'm sorry. I mean, the kids, if the kids are not taught at earlier levels the basics of literacy, the basics of numeracy, the basics of even the basics of history, and government structure and civic engagement, when it comes time in high school to go into more complex and more challenging, intellectually challenging material, they're not ready.
And discussions too. Yeah. I think it's so important that they are, and we know from business, interpersonal, with the age of the internet, the age of the cell phone, with the age of technology, which has helped education tremendously, but again, our children now are so insular with their cell phones and with their how they communicate. They use to communicate with each other face to face and in a group setting is very difficult for these kids in the last decade that I've found.
Especially post-COVID, I would imagine, right, John?
Yes, absolutely. It's like their cell phone is their emotional handbag. I mean, they cannot. I mean, it's foreign to me, and I'm sure to you gentlemen, but it's like it. I can't explain, because it's their everything is this piece of metal that if they lost it or couldn't use it for an entire day, I think they'd have a conniption. I don't know. It's very difficult. I try to relate to them though. I try to understand that this is important to them, but it's also important. And I being a physical adaptive physical education teacher, it's great to see them put it away, and now we're interacting. And I always try to have very open-ended questions, and they have to discuss things with each other. They have to come up with some take 15 seconds and come up with a strategy, and they all have to speak to each other. And you're going to have your leaders, you're going to have your followers, and that's okay. But as trying to just make sure that they are working together in a social situation. And that goes back to civics, like JR was talking about. How, if we don't get them social, and little, the younger elementary K-5, they're a lot more social with each other, more so, because hopefully, we can't control that in America. When a parent gives a child a cell phone, I feel, I don't know who said it, but once you hand a child a cell phone, creativity is thrown out the window. Creativity is done for that child. And I know I'm bouncing over a little bit, but I totally agree with JR in reference to the you have to create a foundation. And if you don't create that educational foundation, and or if that foundation is disrupted, which has been disrupted in so many of our children's lives with divorce, with other social, with the war, the Ukrainian war, 9/11, the recent COVID, how that has made an impact on children. And then now with the new media, and with the recent unfortunate and horrific, gun violence in this amazing nation in which we live in, and how that impacts even my own children, my own, children. I still have one in high school, and how that impacts her on a daily basis. I never had to think when I went into my school, or when I actually, rode my bike or walked to school, I never had a thought once that it was going to be an unsafe place, or that that I would die in this place. And it's such a shocking revelation and a reality that this is what's going on. This is another, part of our educational system that the administration obviously wants to make sure that our school is safe, and I believe they're doing everything they can do. But reality is these other topics of gun legislation, and also education. When's the last time we've heard about that in the media? And when's the last time we've heard about health and fitness in the media, on a national level? We need our leaders, or we need to come up with a way. We have the National Education Department, but we don't have really a national fitness and a national health, fitness, and exercise department in our country. And I feel, a healthy body is a healthy mind, and that's even more important today as well.
Well, that's a good point. But outside influences aside for a minute, is there a reason athleticism or health is not being stressed, or civics? If you can graduate from high school and not know what your rights and responsibilities are as a citizen, why isn't it being taught in the fundamental age, JR, as you mentioned before, early in the education of a child? Why isn't that being taught anymore?
A lot of the things that John was saying about cell phones was very resonant with me, because we have adopted a zero tolerance policy for the cell phones out of concern for the kids' safety, because of cyberbullying and because of inappropriate posting on social media. But what drove me crazy about the presence of the cell phones in the room was that the kids didn't have to know anything anymore, because they could look it up. And there were teachers, not many, but enough, who were going to bat for the idea that taking the cell phones away from the kids during class was not a good idea because they needed the cell phones to look things up during class. And this is, this is bizarre. The original issue was that they didn't learn the things that they needed to look up when they were supposed to learn them. When I was a kid, and when you and I went to school together, Tom, history was intimately connected to geography. Knowledge of geography went hand in hand with knowledge of community structure and government structure. A kid, perhaps, before he can really understand, as you said, what his rights are as an American citizen, where these rights come from, what the separation of powers means, what the branches of the government do. Can you give the kid a map of the continental United States and have the kid identify each and every country, each and every state? Can you give a kid a map of Europe and have them identify each and every country in Europe? When you and I were in school, we're a little older than John, but when you and I were in school, tell me I'm wrong, we were taught those things. And this is just one little tiny example of basic information that you were supposed to have at your metaphorical fingertips. You and I had it. I did. You came a little later to the elementary school we went together. I had a teacher in elementary school who taught us the times tables by teaching us songs about the times tables and dancing around the room, and connecting this rather mundane information with some healthy visuals, to the point where, say whatever you want, without the use of a calculator. You can wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning and say to me, what's 9 times 9? And I'm going to tell you it's 81. We are at a point right now where we are disputing whether or not it is good for kids to have this information at their fingertips, whether or not it's good for their self-esteem to have this information at their fingertips, whether or not giving them this information is a form of indoctrination. And my simple point is that without those basic tools, they can't go on to the bigger ideas. I hope I didn't lose your point in all of that, but that was what I was thinking when John was talking about how cell phones, especially in the COVID period and in the aftermath of the COVID period, have completely have murked things up even more than they were already.
Well,
Absolutely. And
I'm sorry, John, I was going to say, given the state of health in this country, depending, people our age and older, to John's point earlier, why isn't physical education being stressed anymore? Do you think?
John would have to speak to that.
Well, why do you
I think
it isn't, John?
You're asking me, Tom?
Yes, sir.
I feel that when it's just like outside influences, correct? And when something happens, back when, I'm sure you guys remember when we had the Lake Placid Olympics, when we had the Summer Olympics in Los Angeles and Atlanta, when we saw Americans, and especially going through, some of those Miracle on Ice, and we saw Carl Lewis, and then it would go through to the 90s where, you had Michael Jordan and you had Larry Bird, and some of the amazing things that when it's the 90s with the U.S. women's soccer team, and those things, we have the soccer moms out there, but we do not, again, what about those kids that cannot have the socioeconomics to be able to have parents who can have the time to bring them to sports? Where does the federal government lie in helping out more, with these kids who want to be active, yet again, they don't have the means. They don't have the means to have the adult to be able to support, to get them to these athletic endeavors that they would like to do. It's something on a national level. We all know about the obesity rate, where we're about 1/3. I think it's about 32%, between 32 and 36% of Americans are obese. Another percentage is overweight. It's very frustrating that we don't, that for whatever reason they definitely can see it in TikTok and the dancing, and the kids are seeing this image again, like kids saw from decades and decades of magazine ads or in the television shows growing up, and about what your, especially for women, what your body's supposed to look like. And that's the women's empowerment movement, which is changed in so many ways for the positive, I feel. Absolutely. But then again, you just had a recent situation with the professional female soccer organization here in America, where you had several coaches who were being inappropriate physically and psychologically to some of these players, and it was just absolutely horrendous. And again, the players wanted to speak up, but again, the administration wanted to keep it hushed, because if we say anything, if we don't want, the ones who have the money and the ones who have the power don't want it to break up, obviously, because you can't say that there's something wrong within the organization. Sorry, I went off on that little bit of a tangent there, but back to New York State is one of the only states that do require 4 years of physical education in order, as a New York State graduate, and I think that's tremendous. And it again is something that I think nationally, when have you heard the last, or even your local,
I think John froze up a little bit.
Tom, I was listening to John, and I defer to John, obviously, because phys ed is his discipline. In many ways, physical education is something that the federal government could plausibly point to as an indication that federal policy in education is working. I do think, for example, the President's Council on Physical Fitness is a very commendable thing. And I remember when I was organizing graduation at Scanlon High School in the Bronx, where I taught for many years, that was one of the highlights of the graduation ceremony, that the kids were cited by the President of the United States for completing a regimen that combined both physical fitness with knowledge of proper diet and health practices. And there is a certain degree to which a kind of an overriding principle of organization has a very positive effect in many different sectors. And there always seems, at least on paper, that there's a tremendous potential for the federal government to be that organizing principle. But you go back to the point you made before, Tom, about the proliferation of administration. Unfortunately, we see in history time and time again that bureaucracy is the enemy of progress, and that no matter what the intentions that stimulate the growth of the bureaucracy might be, the bureaucracy in and of itself kind of not only compromises the intentions, but robs or takes away from the energy of educators and educational institutions, the kind of energy that was going towards the teaching of the basics, if that makes any sense.
It does.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I was going to say you froze up before, John, so that's why we kept going. But what I got from your point before, John, was it's not so much a will to fund the physical education, but just a will to stress it. Am I right or wrong on that?
Correct. And in some ways, funding, though, in America, we started the first, because most countries to my understanding, they don't have the same after school activities. It's more private, in Europe, and I believe even in South America. But we started our high school extracurricular activities for sports in the 30s and 40s. And in those days, we had a freshman team, we had a JV team, and you had the varsity team. And since then, and I can't speak numbers, but I'm sure our population, maybe 1.5, maybe 2 million of people in the United States, our population has changed just a little bit since then. And we still have, most schools don't even have a freshman team anymore. They don't have JV and varsity. And we have not been able to provide, our population's expanded 3-4 times, and those students who are depending on the public schools to give them a chance to play sports, because now we can provide rides for them and provide things. But now only those children who economically were able to get the training and be able to go to extracurricular, to go to the weekends, to go to play Little League, to go and play soccer and travel and do all this travel sports. Now, instead of we still only provide one team, and those students get cut. Those students do not make the team, and that's so sad. It's so frustrating that we should have 2 JV teams. Whatever the numbers require, I don't think a child, now of course, if their level of play or their ability to play the sport is a safety issue to the team. We've all heard those great stories where the player becomes the team manager, and then he or she just keeps working at it, and they finally get on the team. They get to play in the game. And I just feel those little moments in one's lives can have such a meaning and an impact that again, administration, and why don't we provide more opportunities in certain schools where the population needs it and wants it? And a caveat to that, right now, with the kids post-COVID, I've never seen it in my entire years, the number of students now that are not participating, and it has gone down dramatically. It's we are in a real, trying time right now in athletic participation in public high schools.
Well, to your point, what would be, in your opinion, the reason why, like you said, there's only one team per school rather than a freshman JV varsity?
Money.
So it is a
Money.
financing problem. Okay.
Absolutely, because you have to have pay. You have to pay another coach. You have to have more fields for that team to play. For those kids to play with. But it can be done. I mean, coaches and athletic directors. I mean, I would love, unfortunately, maybe someday, but anyway, if a child or if there's a group of children that want to participate, and again, getting like JR said, that the zero tolerance of the cell phone. When you're playing in a basketball game, you can't have your cell phone, on you. You're playing, you're communicating, you're working. And the other thing with coaches, the coaching and officiating, we are in a dramatic stage of decline in officials as well. And that's another point. Go ahead, Joe.
I'm sorry, Tom. And John, I didn't mean to interrupt. As I'm listening, I'm thinking how ironic it is that we're losing so much in terms of extracurricular athletics because of the lack of funding. Whereas the crisis in the classroom right now is increasingly a lack of teachers.
Oh, yes.
That on one side, we don't have nearly enough coaches and nearly enough referees and nearly enough officials because there's no money for it. But on the other side, there's a critical shortage of teachers and paraprofessionals in the classroom. And to a certain extent, you could not so much lay the blame for that, but indicate that well-intentioned federal mandates that create a sort of a mandate that there have to be more paraprofessionals in the classroom. On the one hand, if there's not people willing to step up and take those jobs, all the federal mandates in the world are not going to put more educators in the classroom. And on the other hand, if the school is confronted with the need to hire more people for the core curriculum, unfortunately, where the money is going to come from is extracurricular physical phys ed, varsity sports. It's going to come from bands. It's going to come from drama programs, and there's going to be this sort of cavalier attitude that, you know, we who are English teachers and social studies and math and science teachers, our needs are more pressing than the needs of our colleagues who teach phys ed and music and art. And the whole idea of federal intervention in education is to make sure that the best possible education can be offered to the largest number of people, regardless of their socioeconomic status, regardless of the injustices that were suffered by their ancestors and their immediate forebears. You know, it just struck me as you were saying that, John, and I can't say enough about that. Everybody is well-intentioned. Everybody wants the best for the kids, but the problem is when the government mandates certain things and leaves it up to the local educational communities to figure out a way to pay for that. All too often, what gets short shrift are the things that we all know were very, very valuable, if not as valuable, a part of our educational experiences. Teamwork, the opportunity to proceed in healthy activities after school, keep you out of trouble, et cetera, et cetera. It's a vicious cycle, and you know, it's what I'm saying is that, you know, intervention, no matter how well intentioned, is not helping that situation at all.
Well, what promulgates the need for these regulations? And can you give me a specific regulation that would sort of make a case in point?
Where I work, I'm working with special needs populations. And special needs populations are the kids in our classes have IEPs, individualized educational programs. And these are legal documents. These are prescriptions for what the kid needs from the district and from the school to be successful in education. And John can back me up on this. There is a paraprofessional position called one-to-one. If a kid is mandated by his IEP to have a one-to-one aide, that means that somebody has to be hired by the district to go through the day with that kid, from the beginning of the day to the end of the day, to go to all the kids' classes with them, and to be his his or her personal educator in the classroom. Now, especially among more challenging populations, that is a very demanding job. It doesn't pay all that much. And the educational requirements for it are obviously not the same as the educational requirements for instructors in the classroom or teaching assistants. But the law says we have to have them. And the problem is that the funding has to come for these positions, even though we're having a very difficult time filling these positions because, frankly, people don't want them, because they are very demanding jobs for very little money. You know, when you are talking about government and federal government involvement in anything, you are always talking about the danger of the unfunded mandate. The federal government says it is imperative that we have this, therefore we say that the states have to come up with a way to get this. Without giving the states any more insight into that, then you have to come up with a way to get that. It's going to lead, I hate to keep repeating myself, to, taking funds from other places. And the ironic thing is, taking those funds from the other places doesn't really do anything to fix the crisis of not enough instructors in the classroom, not enough paraprofessionals in the classroom. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I saw a dramatic decline, unfortunately, with COVID in my own school, where literally almost a third of the paraprofessionals, and many of them are seniors or older ages, and they retired. We are struggling, and I agree 100% with JR that these positions, these paraprofessional positions, can be very difficult, even if it's not a one-on-one in ratio. Some of the population you're dealing with, you're dealing with bathrooming issues, you're dealing with behavioral issues, you're dealing with, which in turn, physically and emotionally, affects a person going to work. Yes, in a lot of these situations, the reasons that paraprofessionals, want to be there is also with the benefits. We do have a great, benefit situation for them, but again, for what the work that they have to do, they definitely are. I couldn't do my job without them. It's not an easy situation at all, and with teachers as well, just like JR said, yes, we are in a, the baby boomers are heading out, and a lot of them headed out as well during COVID. They just saw this, and as we took up as well, and I know JR, I know you're a little bit old, but I'm glad
I'm technically a baby boomer, John.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
My days are numbered.
I hear you.
I got 38 years behind me. I don't have 38 years ahead of me, that's for sure.
Well, John, do you see what JR
Thank
mentioned
you.
before about money being drawn away from your area into the more core areas, or not? Do you see?
Absolutely. I mean, it's just like someone's personal budget at home. If we need to, what do we do? You're going to have to take, one of these streaming services. You're going to have to get rid of it. I mean, you're going to have to, it's always gone that way in education, where if there's, it's such a shame though, where the population of our country has increased, yet we have not increased the number of athletic teams. I mean, that's just quid pro quo. I mean, it's right there in front of you, and I don't know where I heard that statement, maybe some documentary, but it makes sense, and unfortunately, what JR is saying does make sense. Where if you have to have money, where are you going to take it from? And the arts. And it's a shame, because some of the, especially students who are just getting by in the general public education, it's called splinter skills. And I'm sure JR knows that, where the kids that aren't the real smart, and the ones that aren't real struggling, those kids in the middle, and that's who I was. You're just getting by, and the arts are where some of your, even just where you can be so creative in art class and music class and in shop class, home economics. These teachers, I can still remember some of the things that they taught me, and it's has stuck with me throughout my life. And life is not just, um, reading, math, social study. When a kid who, of course, you have to have those cores. You have to have English and math in order, you have to, that foundation again. But we have to be able to sprinkle that foundation with, uh, just making a child and making one's experience as a whole, and trying to capture everything that they may be. Who knows who of our great fellow, Americans and other people in this world who became who they are, who've changed this world because of the arts. And obviously not only that, but you have to take the big picture too, you know. And again, we need to find more of a national, I feel, identity. We need a rebirth in education, or we're really going to start falling behind in the rest of the world. I mean, Andy Rooney, I'm sure you boys know who that is, you know. And we are a nation of peasants. We're a nation of people that came from here to find, you know, safety and dreams. And you know, yes, we're not the smartest, and you can't teach a light pole, but if we can try to make sure that we engage and we demand, I think, and politicians are so scared now to demand more of us, and we politicians are always just dancing around on topics, and I don't know, I've not heard. Hopefully, maybe this next time we talk more, you know, with the world problems going on in society, but we have to get it back to home where education is what's going with it. Who's going to take the forefront? Who's going to take the national lead and try to, you know, I know Bush did the No Child Left Behind. I'm sure JR recalls, I know the Obama administration was trying to do like a universal type of testing that every child in the United States, grades 3 through 5, I believe 6 through 8, and then in the high school level, and that would kind of give us some type of a barometer. If every kid in the United States was taking the same test, then that gives you a barometer of what's going on, you know, in our system. I don't know, with technology, with computers now, we could get that data a lot easier. I don't know how JR feels about that, but of course you have different, if you ask one question, if you have it worded in the Northeast, in the Southwest, they might take that worded question meaning something different. So because as this amazing nation that we live in, you know, there's different dialects, there's different ways we speak in different areas of this amazing country, and you have to be very careful of the way that you question, you know, make those test questions.
Well, I've always said everybody in the United States has an accent except me. So
Yeah.
I know I've eaten up a lot of both of your times, and I know this is nighttime and you guys have a heavy schedule tomorrow. But before I let you go, and I'd love to have.
Tomorrow is Yom Kippur, Tom.
Oh, tomorrow you got it.
Tomorrow we're off.
Let's go another
Yeah.
round then.
Yeah, tomorrow we have a holiday.
I'm
Precisely because
Yeah.
of the great multicultural society in which we live.
Of course.
Mr. Hogan and I are off tomorrow.
Yes,
for
you're off
Yom
tomorrow,
Kippur.
John?
Yes.
Yeah.
God
Yes.
bless America.
Well, I did
Absolutely.
Catholic school. We never got Yom Kippur off, but I did get St. Patty's Day off because I went to school in New York City. So
I don't get St. Patrick's Day off anymore. But
Yeah.
you got to, you know, everything's a trade-off. As we're saying, you know, that's really what it comes down to. I don't mean to interrupt you, Tom, if you want to wrap it
I
up.
was going to say, I'm sure you've both seen these videos, like these man on the street type scenarios where they ask these high school students, like, what countries border the United States, and someone will say Colorado, you know, what's the capital of France, and they'll say, you know, whatever. They don't have the right answer. I want to know what both your initial reactions to those are. If you've seen those videos, I'm sure you have.
The most poignant thing that I can say about those videos is that they don't surprise me in the least.
Mm.
I about 15 years ago, maybe it's probably more like 10 years ago, an 18-year-old student of mine, 4 months from graduation, asked me in class one day why rain does not extinguish the fire of the sun. Now, among many, many other things I could say about this is that I'm an ELA teacher. You know, that the you know the solar centric theory does not come up very generally in my class. I have to tell you, without getting too schmaltzy, it took that kid a lot of courage to ask that question. And fortunately, he was dealing with somebody who had a superb education. In spite of the obstacles of being brought up at a time and a place when things weren't all that much better than they are now, I could answer the question, and I did answer the question, and I didn't panic. But one of the walkaways that I had from that is, on the one hand, you're talking about like an appalling and embarrassing lack of basic information. But it's very important to remember that there are some things that can only be taught. You would have to be a mathematical genius along the level of the mathematical geniuses like Galileo and Copernicus and Aristophanes in ancient Egypt, who figured out through math and observation the orientation of the planets. But when that knowledge became the shared knowledge of our culture and our civilization, we had a sacred obligation to pass it on to our students. And somebody dropped the ball with this kid. And that's just like one tiny example. So, to answer you asked me for the time, and I built you a watch, but to answer the question, when you see a man on the street interview with a kid who can't tell you what state's border is owned, that's just the tip of the iceberg, man. Some of them still think that the sun is the center of the universe. Some of them, sorry, I beg your pardon. Some of them still think that the Earth is the center of the solar system. Some of them don't even understand the basic relationships of the planets. I mean, there is no way to overstate the problem. And apparently, the best intentions of government policies, both federal and local, have not diminished this problem.
John, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are, it's comes back to greed, and it comes back to nationalism, comes back to sacrifice, which a lot of sacrifice and greed, two different spectrums there. So now, it comes back to, the church that was so prevalent in our country at one time. It's, we had order, we had structure, we had purpose, we had nationalism, because obviously what we fought for, we're still one of the youngest nations in our entire planet. Just going back to the Revolutionary War, how we were an army of 3,000, and we took on one of the biggest army in the entire world, and we still won. And just going back from our birth, with George Washington and all those men who the Declaration of Independence, they looked old with the wigs and all, but they were young. George Washington was like 43. John Adams was in his 30s. A lot of those men were young, and they came up with the ideas to create this amazing nation. And again, the man on the street, I think it was a great author who's passed, and I'm sure you gentlemen know, David McCullough. There are kids now, even at some of our Ivy League schools, that don't know certain things about the original 13 colonies, and what do you can name all 13, who can name our first, the first state, who are, and of course, as you guys know this, and our history, as well as, we were a nation of, if you were from Virginia, you're a Virginian. If you were, your state mattered, was so important to you. Now it doesn't, that importance of your home state isn't as important as it used to be. Right. With technology, with how now with the invention of the airplane, obviously we could fly and drive anywhere than any other country can. We can go anywhere we want. We have such freedoms, and I think those, I'm sorry to go off in a tangent here. I think that just the basics, though, of these basic things, you should know who your border states are. You should know the what the our basic, how the rivers create borders of our states. Normally, the rivers create the borders of our states many a times, and how the rivers used to be our highways, and just these basic, simple engineering and understanding these. One thing David McCullough did was write about some of the most important feats of all time: the Panama Canal, the Brooklyn Bridge, the invention of the airplane.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The invention of the airplane. Can you imagine those two men? The invention of the airplane. How man thought that was so foreign that they would be able to fly, and those two guys did not. Did you know this? They didn't go to college. Either one of the Wright brothers went to college, and they were able to establish that feat.
So maybe there's hope for us all, John.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, I was looking for a positive note to end this on, and I couldn't have done it better than you, Mr. Hogan. I do appreciate both of your time, and I do feel like we just scratched the surface of what I think is the underlying problem in a lot of ills of society, which is education. And I'd love to have the both of you back down the road if you guys are willing to talk more about this subject. And I certainly do appreciate both of your times. Mr. Hogan, thank you so much for coming by tonight. It was an honor to have you. And Mr. McCarthy,
Thank you for your time.
So we had John Hogan, who is teaching now. This is your 25th year. I think he froze up again. And Mr. McCarthy, this is your 38th year?
39th.
39th. Okay, so that's without even doing a calculator, I know that's 64 years combined. So I do appreciate both you men coming by. And like, again, with your permission, I'd like to have you further on up the road.
Absolutely. And Tom, you owe your ability to do simple sums to the fine education you received.
I was so
back in the 20th century.
about you were talking about the times tables before, and the reason why I know the times table is because I was given that as punishment for my clowning around in class a lot, to write the times tables.
It's, what can I tell you?
Whatever works. So, Mr. McCarthy, Mr. Hogan, thank you both so much, and hopefully we'll see you in the short term. Thank you, man.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much.